My name is Ellen Miller. I'm Pro Bono Manager. We're really excited you're here. Just to speed through this, I want to say that this is a presentation for Pro Bono volunteers. As it's an evolving situation, this is not a presentation for media or for general information, and we ask that you please respect that, and also not share the content of this right now because we want to make sure that we're giving the right information. For those of you that are not familiar with the National Immigrant Justice Center, please know that we provide legal services to immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, wonderful human beings from around the world, and we do it through an integral service model, impact litigation, policy, and direct legal services. Of course, we do this all with our Pro Bono network to make our communities safe. And so we have a great team behind us, but today Lisa Coop will give the presentation, and we're going to jump in, and we're very excited that you're here. This is being recorded right now, and we will be sharing the recording post-presentation. You should also have all received the PowerPoint presentation via email. If you didn't, put it in the chat and I'll get it to you. Thank you so much. Lisa Coop.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa. Thank you so much for being with us today. Do collect your questions in the chat as they come to you, and we will take time at the end to respond. As Ellen said, we're learning as we go every day, if not every hour. Things are changing on the ground, and so we are doing our best to stay on top of information and ensure that we're providing the best possible legal response to the individuals who are arriving in our communities from Texas, and hopefully setting the stage so that they're able to integrate themselves into our community. I do want to say that NIJC is so very proud to be partnering with the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois in this response, and their leadership has been incredible and has really created an environment where we're able to really celebrate all that is good about Chicago's welcoming attitude and openness, and we're really glad to be a part of the community of advocates and our civil society partners who are doing this work together. So NIJC is one small piece of the puzzle of organizations that are responding to this situation. So with no further ado, we will be talking today about a little bit of background on what is going on, and then what the legal services response should be. And then hopefully many of you at the end of this presentation will find yourself willing to jump in and become involved in the legal services response by, for now, helping us do legal services orientations to individuals who are arriving to make sure they are equipped to make informed decisions about what they want to do with their immigration legal cases. And potentially in the future, we'll be in a position to provide more substantive one-on-one consultations with the individuals who are arriving in Chicago. All right. So you should be seeing our boss, Mary Meg McCarthy's wonderful quote in the little text box there. But in end of August, beginning of September, the governor of Texas started sending buses of individuals to Chicago, because Chicago has a proud reputation of being a sanctuary city, of being a city that welcomes and protects immigrants. And many of you will have heard that before that there were buses going to New York and Washington, D.C., and those communities were working to respond to the arrival of new individuals, migrants, asylum seekers who were coming to their communities. So Chicago had a little bit of the benefit of seeing how things unfolded in those other cities as we prepared our response. But again, just the city and the state, before buses were even en route to Chicago, were already thinking through what will our response look like. Now, legally speaking, the state of Texas, because it is a state and not the federal government, doesn't have the authority to expel people or deport people from the state of Texas. And as far as we understand, people are boarding these buses volitionally. There may be some misrepresentation about where people are going or why they have to go there. For the most part, though, we think that people are deciding to come to Chicago, deciding to take the buses, and we are working to turn the situation into something that's a positive gain for our community. The buses hold about 50 people. So when we hear a bus is coming, we usually know we have about 24 hours before we'll have some new individuals to welcome to our community. Buses hold about 50 people. We've had, I believe, more than 300 people arrive since September 1st. And that number will continue to climb. I think I was hearing this afternoon that there's another bus expected to leave, or that has already left the state of Texas. State of Texas is being intentionally cagey and not communicating with the state of Illinois about when people are coming, because the point is to create chaos. So our response of welcome and celebration of these new arrivals is an important reaction to the politicization of asylum seekers and other migrants that is taking place on the part of the state of Texas. So when people are arriving, so these charter buses are working their way up from Texas to Chicago. They're arriving at Union Station. From Union Station, people are going by CTA bus, usually to shelters, and then at some point to the city-run reception center. And the reception center, we'll talk more about that, is at this point where NIJC is providing legal services and orientation to individuals. Thus far, most of the arrivals have been from Venezuela. That could change, but for now we're seeing a lot of Venezuelans, some families, some single adults. So it's really been a mix, but largely Venezuelan thus far. And the needs that they present are obviously initially acute humanitarian aid needs, which the city, the state, other partners are responding to. And then there's a lot of stress and concern about what their legal options and rights are, because they have all had contact with Customs and Border Protection, or ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, at the border before they come up to Illinois. So they are all in various stages of the immigration process and need to be making decisions about how they want to pursue their immigration case. So when people are coming, as I said, they arrive at Union Station, then they go on the CTA buses to the shelters and later the reception center. And then at the reception center, there's humanitarian aid. That's when they're given a packet of legal information and a little card that we created that's got a QR code that leads to the web page that's on that slide there, and you'll have access to that information later. And that is a landing page that we created to just provide basic information and answer some of those constant, really pressing questions that people have when they first arrive. So we tried to create some resources, some very basic resources that are available to them at the outset. On that webpage, there's a PDF, a packet that people can download that has a lot of resources about how to access legal services, how to comply with your ICE reporting obligations, how to follow up with the immigration court, and so forth. So hopefully those resources will continue to be useful to people who are arriving. But at the reception center, so the part in red here is where we're hoping you all will get involved. Legal volunteers will provide guidance on scheduling ICE check-in appointments and confirming court status. And then we want to, we're not able to do full legal consultations and full exploration of legal relief for these individuals. We are able to provide an overview of the different types of legal relief that may be most relevant to this population. So we want to make sure that people are familiarized with asylum, with temporary protected status, with U visas, T visas, SIJ, and in a moment we'll go in to a little bit more detail about what those things are. But we want to begin to orient people to those topics so they can start thinking about how they want to pursue their case. So at the reception center, NIJC and our legal volunteer partners will provide an orientation, a group orientation, during which we will explain these things. Following the legal orientation at this point, there is no ongoing formal relationship between NIJC or the legal volunteers and the individuals with whom we have met. That could change in the future, but for now, we see our role as providing these early interventions and ensuring that people have a basic understanding of their legal obligations and rights and can begin to make informed decisions. So this is an interim plan. As I said before, it is our hope that we can transition from the reception center to the shelters where migrants are able to get a little more settled and recover a little bit from their trip before we engage with them more substantively on their immigration cases. And hopefully there is space and capacity to do one-on-one legal consultations where we're able to individually speak with people about their cases and help them understand the process that they are going through. So the legal orientations that we are doing, and I apologize for the text heavy slide. I know this is poor PowerPoint etiquette, but we did have a lot of information that we wanted to share with you. But the nuts and bolts of it are when people arrive at the reception center. So usually they're coming from the shelters. Occasionally they'll be coming directly from Union Station, but it seems like primarily people are first going to the shelters and then later to the reception center. When they arrive, there are a number of different services that happen at the reception center, legal services being one of them. And so when people reach the legal services station, reach NIJC's table, we collect basic information about the individuals that we are seeing. So this is something that NIJC staff will do on site at the reception center, where we're just trying to get a feel for who is coming through, what country, and a little bit of understanding of what their legal situation looks like. And from there, after we check people in, essentially, we'll invite them to go to a waiting area from which our legal volunteers will prepare to conduct the legal orientations. So most people that are participating in the legal orientations will not formally be in deportation proceedings yet. So one of the things that we'll be looking at when we're checking people in is whether their paperwork suggests that they have been issued what's called a notice to appear, or a document that is used to formally commence removal proceedings, or whether they have been given a document called a notice to report, which is a paper that tells them, hey, when you get where you're going, check in with ICE at your ICE appointment, at your Immigration and Customs Enforcement appointment. Then probably from there, you'll be issued this notice to appear, which once filed with the court initiates removal proceedings. So there are some people coming who already have that NTA document, and those individuals we're pulling aside and speaking to separately. People that are in the notice to report, so the people who have not yet been placed in removal proceedings, those are the people that we are really focusing on for the legal orientations, because that's the majority of the people who are coming through. All right, the orientations that we hope you will help us give will be to about 10 people at a time. And again, the reception center is a beautiful space, but it is a space with not a ton of good space for doing legal orientation. So we've identified a stairwell and a second floor conference room that seem to work pretty well, where we can get away from the noise a little bit and have some space to talk with people and provide this information that we hope for them to receive. The orientations are in Spanish, so hopefully you are you're comfortable speaking in Spanish, and we will provide a script. So while we're going to go through a lot of this content, we want you to have a basic understanding of it. Please also know that NIJC will be creating a script that presenters, volunteers will be using to give these legal orientations. And we will also be providing information. So those packets that I referenced that can be downloaded from the webpage that we created, that information will also be available at the reception center. So that will be providing guidance to recent arrivals, both orally through the legal orientation, and then also in the form of these packets that we'll be handing out that include a lot of information about how to find an attorney, self-help information about changing your address, and so forth. All right, and then again, following the legal orientation, we're not yet at a place where we have capacity to offer one-on-one legal consultations. We're hoping to move in that direction, but for now, we'll be providing referral information to participants. So if you are the individual that is giving the orientation, your role at the beginning would be to introduce yourself and explain what it is we are trying to accomplish there. So this is a legal orientation intended to equip people to understand their rights and make informed decisions. I think it is important to acknowledge the stress, the anxiety, the difficulty that these individuals have experienced making their way to Chicago. I think part of being a welcoming city and welcoming these recent arrivals is acknowledging the struggle that they've experienced. A lot of them will probably be very stressed out. They may have been separated from family members who may be on different buses, or may have come before, or maybe haven't made it over the border yet and are still in Mexico. So you may see people that are in pretty significant distress for those reasons. And people are really worried that there is something they need to do immediately in order to avoid being deported. And for the most part, you can help calm at least those fears and help people recognize that while there are things they need to attend to promptly on their immigration legal case, it is extremely unlikely that something that they do or don't do within their first hours or days of arriving in Chicago will cause them to be deported or will irreparably hurt their immigration case. So hopefully we can start to de-escalate some of those concerns in the context of this orientation. As the leader of the orientation, you'd ask people to get out that stack of paperwork that they would have received at the border. So when they came through Texas and had contact with either the Border Patrol or with ICE, they would have been issued paperwork telling them the procedural posture of their case and instructing them usually to report to ICE. And so we want them to have those documents out, because part of what we'll be doing in the orientation is covering the content and helping decipher those papers and helping people understand what's going on and what decisions they have to make. So one of the first things that we want to explore with people is confirming the fact that they've entered on parole. So legal parole is the mechanism through which Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or the Department of Homeland Security, is releasing people from detention or from custody at the border into the interior of the United States. Now, having this parole didn't require that they travel to Chicago, but this is, again, the legal way that the Department of Homeland Security allows them to enter the United States temporarily to pursue their immigration case. So parole doesn't mean you're not going to be deported or you're not in removal proceedings, but it's that mechanism that allows people to not be in immigration detention. Most people have been granted 2 months of parole. We have been advocating, and as you become versed in these issues and have opportunity to advocate with government officials, we would like for that parole to be a whole lot longer. So, we've been suggesting that the government consider expanding that parole up to 2 years, because having parole allows people to apply for employment authorization. However, if you only have 2 months of parole, by the time you would apply for employment authorization and receive it, your parole would be expired. Your employment authorization can never exceed the length of your parole. So these short parole periods allow people to come into the United States, but they don't do anything to allow them to work or to have long-term protection in the United States. So it is not permanent status. It's not a path to status, but people who have parole down the line, it's something they should be sure that they understand, because it could have immigration benefits if they later are seeking to adjust status through a family member or through a labor petition. So again, there's not really much immediate benefit to having this parole, but it is something that can be useful down the line. It allows them to demonstrate that they've had this admission into the United States, or this parole into the United States. That can be a positive benefit in their immigration case in the future. After parole ends, individuals may begin to accrue what's called unlawful presence. Again, there's no immediate consequence of that. It doesn't mean someone is more or less likely to be deported or to be picked up by ICE necessarily, but it is something that can be problematic in some forms of immigration relief down the line. However, I imagine that there is a lot of stress, and we hear from a lot of people that they believe that they have to apply for immigration status before the expiration of that parole, and that is not accurate. For example, if someone is electing to apply for asylum protection, they generally have a year to apply for asylum from the time they enter the United States, and whether or not they are in parole at the time they apply for asylum does not have bearing on whether or not their case will be successful. All right, so the two documents that I was talking about, the notice to appear and the notice to report, look a little bit like this. So again, the notice to appear, this document on the left that initiates removal proceedings, that is a document that fewer people are arriving with. Most likely people will not have that NTA, but will receive it when they later go to an appointment with Immigration and Customs Enforcement and get that document, which ICE will then at some point file with the immigration court, which is what initiates removal proceedings. More likely people will arrive with this notice to report, this I-385, which is the document that says, again, hey, when you get where you're going, you need to check in with ICE within 60 days or sometimes less than that. We've been seeing various time periods on that notice to report, but that is the document that says your obligation is to check in with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, at which point you will likely get this NTA. Now, we're not always seeing people issue the NTA at their first ICE check-in appointment. Some people are just being told, okay, great, you checked in, check in again in 6 months or a year. And at that point, they may get their NTA or they may get their NTA in the mail. It is very evident that the Department of Homeland Security is struggling to keep up with all of the paperwork related to these cases, and part of that means they're not always timely issuing the notices to appear, which is not necessarily a bad thing for some individuals who benefit from having more time to explore their cases and determine what relief they may be eligible to seek. All right, so again, if the individuals that you see have the notice to report, they're usually obligated to report to ICE. The paperwork often will indicate or should indicate the date and location of the ICE check-in. Many people got on a bus to Chicago after having expected to go to a different city, like maybe New York or DC. And so there are many people who are arriving with ICE notices to report that suggest or that instruct them to report to ICE offices in other parts of the country. So it could be Miami, or it could be New York, or it could be DC. This does not mean that people need to immediately get on another bus and get to those cities to comply with their ICE check-in. It does mean that they need to take action to update ICE as to their current location and address and adjust that appointment to Chicago if Chicago is the place where they expect to stay. Now, some people that are arriving in Chicago plan to move on to another part of the country in very short order. And for those people, we probably don't want them to change their appointment to Chicago only to have them have to change it again when they get to their next location. So people should ideally be adjusting their check-in location to the place where they expect to stay for the longer term. When people need to, and this will be a part of the orientation, we want people to understand that when they need to change their ICE check-in location, there is a way to do that through the ICE portal. So the webpage that you see there is a mechanism through which people can go online and indicate that they need to change the location of their ICE check-in appointment. Now, we believe that as of very recently, maybe even in today or in the last day or so, ICE has managed to open up more Chicago appointments. Until now, we have been seeing when we go online that ICE check-ins are not available in Chicago until January, which for most people is well outside the days that they have been given on their parole. And so that has caused a lot of stress and anxiety because people understand they're obligated to check in with ICE, but are unable to do so because there are not appointments available for them to have those check-ins. We think that that has been alleviated to some degree, and hopefully that remains the case and that people can reschedule their ICE check-in appointments for Chicago within their 60-day parole periods. ICE has also created this email address on here that allows people to check in by email if they are unable to physically attend their ICE check-in because it's in another location, or because they are unable to obtain an ICE check-in date during the parole period. So if they've got 60 days of parole, they can't get an ICE check-in date until January, but they need to demonstrate compliance with ICE. They can send an email to this email address on here that includes the things listed in the bullet points on the slide, and that we understand from ICE is being accepted as satisfying the ICE check-in requirement. Now, I think there has been some distress among recent arrivals that there's not some kind of kickback email or confirmation that you've complied. We would strongly encourage people to keep a record of having sent that email so that if at a later date there's a suggestion that they didn't comply with their ICE check-in appointment, they have that proof showing that they in fact did. If someone has instead a notice to appear, again, there are fewer cases that we're seeing like this. That may change, but people that have the notice to appear probably also have an ICE check-in requirement. But those people, we also want to make sure that we're looking at whether or not their deportation proceedings in the immigration court have commenced. So the way we determine whether or not an NTA has been filed with the immigration court and if removal proceedings are underway, which means the individual may have an upcoming court date, is by calling that 1-800 number on the slide or going to that web page and then plugging in the A number. So this is known as the alien registration number, or the immigration identification number that's on nearly all of the individualized paperwork that migrants will receive. Entering that number should indicate whether or not their case is found in the system. If it is not in the system, that means that NTA has not yet been filed with the court and the individual does not have an obligation to attend a court hearing yet. If it is in the system, oftentimes there will be a court date. that indicates when the person needs to go to court. And both of these, through the online portal and through the 1-800 number, will say where the court is. So again, it is possible that someone who previously told the Department of Homeland Security that they're going to Miami could be scheduled for court in Miami, but is now living in Chicago. And in that case, they would need to update their address with ICE and change their ICE check-in if they have ICE check-in requirements, but they would also need to file a motion to change venue with the court. So these are two separate things, updating with ICE and updating with the court. And so it would be important for individuals to file a motion to change venue to get their court proceedings transferred to Chicago. Now, among the materials that we have available for the recent arrivals that we are seeing is a pro se change of venue motion that we will have available to supply to people who are in this position. There are also these dummy dates, as if things weren't complicated enough. There are some NTAs that will purport to have a court date. So they'll have a date and time of court listed on the notice to appear. And this is in response to a Supreme Court decision called Nis Chavez that says a defective NTA doesn't count as effectively placing someone in removal proceedings. And so in response to that, ICE has started issuing, they don't do this all that often anymore, but we've seen a few of these come through. These notices to appear that have dates that are not actually court dates at all. And so it's so important to check that 1-800 number or check that online portal and see if that notice to appear is actually in the system. So if people do have a court date, they have to attend court. This really needs to be a priority. And so this, I would say even more so than the ICE check-ins, if someone has an actual court date, not a dummy date, but if they have an actual court date when they're scheduled to appear before an immigration judge, it is critical that they understand the need to attend, because failure to attend a court hearing most likely will result in an in absentia removal order. And we want people to avoid that at all costs. All right, when people attend the ICE check-in, I think there's a lot of stress and anxiety about what's actually going to happen when you go to that ICE check-in. Are they going to take people into detention? Are they going to put someone on a plane and deport them? Those things are not happening to our knowledge. What mostly happens at an Immigration and Customs Enforcement check-in appointment is that the officer will confirm the biographical data for the individual, confirm their address, confirm their name, confirm the information in their case. Again, if they don't have that notice to appear issued yet, that may be issued at the ICE appointment. And ICE can evaluate whether or not the individual has been compliant with their ICE obligations. So many people are arriving with these ICE apps. So these alternative to detention cell phones that are issued by the government that require people to, for example, send in a text or sometimes send in a picture of themselves to establish that they are where they say they're going to be, and that they are remaining connected to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and that they plan to attend their court hearings, and they're not trying to avoid going forward with the immigration process. Other ATDs that you may have heard about could be ankle monitors or ankle shackles. On the buses coming from Texas, I don't believe we've seen anybody with ankle monitors, but that is something that we certainly want to be on the lookout for and be aware of. There is a possibility that if ICE understood someone to be not complying with their ICE check-in requirements, they could step up an individual and maybe give them an ankle monitor if they didn't have one before. So doing those check-in requirements, whether it's scheduling an appointment through that ICE portal or sending an email to the email address to show compliance, is important to make sure that ICE does not move towards stepping someone up or adding more restrictions to their movement or to their functioning. For the most part, there's not a role for attorneys to play at the ICE check-in appointments. So usually we will tell people what to expect and tell them to let us know if they have any problems at the ICE appointment. But really from NIJC's perspective, unless we have reason to believe that ICE plans to move towards detaining someone, we usually don't attend those ICE check-in appointments, but rather are really focusing our efforts and resources right now on doing these legal orientations and hopefully moving towards providing one-on-one consultations. A question that almost everyone will have is whether or not they are authorized to work. Many people, almost all people who come to the United States expect to build a life for themselves and find a way to support themselves and their families. So wondering about employment is very natural and common. As I said before, people that are coming from the border on these very short periods of parole are not authorized to work by virtue of the parole. And if that ever changes, if the federal government shifts their practice to extend parole to a year or 2 years, at that point, it may make sense for people to apply for employment authorization based on parole. But with 2 months of parole, it doesn't make sense to file that application because there's no way that it will be adjudicated in time for someone to gain an actual benefit from it. So if there are individuals who end up applying for asylum, then 150 days after they apply for asylum, they're eligible to apply for employment authorization. Those of you who have handled asylum matters know that it's never quite that straightforward, that if there's anything that happens in the case that can be attributed to the individual, to the asylum seeker causing the delay, then the accrual of those days becomes more complicated. But generally speaking, 150 days after one applies for employment authorization, applies for asylum, they may become eligible for employment authorization. All right, so there will also be many people that say, I understand, I can't access an employment authorization document right now. I still plan to work. It is important for people who elect to work to understand some of the risks and to try to minimize those risks by not claiming to be a United States citizen. I think there's often a temptation to sign off on that I-9 tax form that you fill out when you accept employment, to just check that box and say you're a citizen. That can have really severe immigration consequences because it's considered a false claim to United States citizenship, and that can carry with it permanent bars to many forms of immigration relief. So we really want people to avoid making those false claims, using false documents, which can carry with them criminal liability. So we just want people to understand those risks. That said, anybody who is working, any worker in the United States, regardless of their immigration status, is of course entitled to rights and protections and should not be, the victim of wage theft or unfair employment practices or national origin discrimination or other abuses. We'd also want people to be very aware of human trafficking that can evolve in situations where you have a vulnerable undocumented worker who's exploited by an employer who maybe is withholding pay or in other ways coercing or harming their worker. So again, we'll touch on this a little bit in the legal orientation, but this is something we'll encourage people to consider, and if they think that they have experienced any of these abuses, of course, follow up with some of our partner organizations that really specialize in labor rights and protecting workers. All right, we've talked quite a bit already about EOIR. So this is the Immigration Court Executive Office for Immigration Review requirements, so I won't belabor this. But people who are in removal proceedings, so people that have that NTA filed with the Immigration Court who are proceeding before the Chicago Immigration Court, so people who plan to stay in our area, may wish to seek service from NIJC's Immigration Court Help Desk. So we have a help desk that at present is telephonic at the number that's in red there on this slide, that people may call to receive additional legal orientations and screenings and guidance and invitations to participate in self-help clinics or pro se clinics to complete applications for asylum and other forms of relief. And we can, from those cases, oftentimes offer referrals for more full legal consultations and possible for full representation. So for people who are staying in Chicago, this can be a good resource to connect them to additional legal services and possible representation. All right, so exploring legal relief. Well, like I said, we want to just touch on, we want to familiarize the people with whom we're meeting with various types of immigration relief that may be relevant. So I had mentioned these 5 types of relief before. I think it's important to signal to people that asylum may be an option. Not everybody who is coming because they're fleeing harm that will qualify them for asylum. But some may be people that have either experienced persecution in the past or have this 10%. So this is Supreme Court precedent that if you can establish this 10% likelihood of future persecution, that's connected to one of these protected grounds, race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or social group membership, that those are people who may qualify for asylum. So we want people to be thinking about what are the reasons they left their country? What are the reasons they feel like they can't go back? If it's because there's no work, because the economy has collapsed, because there's generalized violence, that might not be an asylum case. But it's also important for people to think about other harms they may fear or have experienced that potentially do meet that burden for asylum. So, for example, if there are people who are fleeing political oppression, people who are maybe anti-Maduro, we've heard about a number of musicians coming through the reception centers who maybe faced harm because they were performing anti-Maduro art and music. People that have demonstrated in pro-democracy protests or demonstrations. And again, it's a little tricky because it has to be this individualized harm, right? So if someone went to one march once and nothing really happened and they're not sure that their presence was documented at that rally, that might be a difficult claim to make. But if you've got someone who really has as a history and a practice of participating in political activity that has kind of put them on the radar of the government, that's someone that we want to be thinking about asylum. If you've participated in any NIJC asylum trainings before, you know that we spend a lot of time thinking about membership in a particular social group. And I think in our orientations, it is especially critical to think about and to familiarize people with the idea that if you are afraid of harm because of your sexual orientation or gender identity, if you're LGBTQ, that is something that may form the basis for asylum. And that's something that a lot of people traveling to the United States don't necessarily know or are aware of. So it's really important that we say that out loud at the orientation so that people that are in those groups can hear that message and take it with them and seek out counsel later to explore that claim. The other types of claims that we want to make sure people are aware of are claims related to gender violence or domestic violence. So again, if you have someone that has experienced that type of harm, they may not be aware that that can give rise to an asylum claim. And we want to make sure they're aware of that so they can explore that later. These are some other possible particular social groups that are legally viable, at least in the Seventh Circuit. And so we want, again, just to begin to familiarize people with the broad brushstrokes of asylum so they can be thinking about how they want to proceed with their case. We'll move on to temporary protected status. So there's some confusion among people arriving about whether or not they're eligible to apply for temporary protected status. So TPS is sort of a mechanism that's responsive to the fact that asylum is not available to just broad populations of people that are experiencing economic strife or environmental strife or harm that just affects the entire population. Temporary protected status is a form of legal protection that can be available to populations that are designated by the government to receive this blanket protection. So Venezuela actually has temporary protected status in light of the civil unrest and economic conditions in Venezuela. However, the cutoff date, you had to have been in the United States by March 8, 2021 in order to qualify for TPS. So people that are just arriving now do not qualify for temporary protected status in its current iteration. And so there has been some, I think, misapprehension of that among Venezuelans who are traveling to Chicago. So that is unfortunately not good news, but important information for us to share. And again, as long as we're thinking through what are the advocacy points, what are the things that we want the federal government to be doing, we absolutely want them to redesignate Venezuela and move up that arrival date so that the Venezuelans who have fled to the United States since March of 2021 can access this protection. Temporary protected status, the benefits are different than asylum. If you win asylum, you get to stay in the United States, indefinitely. You can later apply for your green card and your citizenship. There's a path to citizenship and real permanency in that protection. Temporary protected status does not carry that level of protection. However, it is often renewed. So for example, people from El Salvador have had temporary protected status since 2001, and that program has been renewed over and over again. And so there is hope that once a group is designated for temporary protected status, it can continue for some time. And while they're in temporary protected status, they can look at other forms of relief to which they might transition that may have more permanency. The other form of relief, or another form of relief that we want to make sure we're mentioning to the people who are experiencing our orientation, is the U visa. So again, by virtue of being vulnerable in some ways as a recent arrival in the United States, it's possible that the people we meet will have been the victims of crime in the United States. The U visa is a visa that is available to individuals who have experienced criminal activity in the United States and have demonstrated a willingness to cooperate with law enforcement in the investigation, prosecution, or identification of that crime. So when we're giving the orientation, we want to put out the message that if someone has experienced criminal harm in the United States, that is someone that maybe should be considering the U visa as a legal protection option. U visas are again a visa that is ultimately a path towards lawful permanent residency and citizenship, but it is a very long path. There are 10,000 U visas available each year, which means the backlog at this point is years and years, up to 8 to 10 years before someone actually receives the visa. So that is a long-term plan towards permanent status if U visa is the path that one ends up taking. I talked a little bit before about labor trafficking and that vulnerability. There is a T visa that is available to survivors of human trafficking, whether that is labor trafficking or sex trafficking. So if you encounter people that have experienced harm of that sort, so if they are in the United States on account of a trafficking scheme or trafficking incident, that is someone we want to be talking to about a T visa, or we at least want them to be thinking about a T visa. And it is not uncommon for someone to initially pay someone to bring them to the United States in sort of a smuggler situation and have that evolve into a human trafficking situation. So it's not the same thing, but the lines can become blurred where there's force, fraud, and coercion involved in the treatment of the non-citizen by the person who is doing the trafficking. So our script for the orientation will include mention of T visas so that people are familiarized with that form of relief. And then the final form of relief that we wanted to mention is special immigrant juvenile status. And this is relief and protection that is available to minors who have been abandoned, abused, or neglected by one or both parents. So in the individuals coming on the buses, we're seeing some family groups, so not unaccompanied minors. Unaccompanied minors go through a different process when they encounter the Department of Homeland Security on the border. But you may see some single parent families where the other parent was abusive or abandoned the children or neglected them. And that may be a case where the children may be eligible for a special immigrant juvenile visa. Now, one of the drawbacks of SIJ is that a child who is granted special immigrant juvenile status is never able to petition for their parents. So even if one parent has been a very positive presence in their life, if the other parent has abandoned, abused, or neglect, and that has given rise to the SIJ, the child can't turn around and later petition for the good parent. One thing that's worth noting in the state of Illinois is that Illinois passed a state law that allows guardianships to be in place until the age of 21. So if you are seeing young adults among the arrivals, even though they're not technically minors, if they are from between the ages of 18 and 21, they could still potentially qualify for SIJ, and we would want them to be aware of that fact after they go through our orientation, as that is, again, another possible form of relief that could be available to them. All right, so while you are doing the orientations, again, we're not yet at a point where we can do one-on-one consultations. We hope that we'll be emailing you all in the coming weeks, able to say like, okay, we're ready to transition from doing these orientations to doing more substantive one-on-one orientations. But for now, we'll be doing these legal orientations and then offering referrals for people to pursue more substantive legal support. Again, people who are staying in Chicago are invited to call our immigration court help desk if they are in removal proceedings, as nearly all of these individuals will be, and we will hopefully be able to provide support in that way. If you are a licensed attorney and you meet someone while you are doing orientations and decide this is a case that you would like very much to take on directly and provide full representation, we welcome that. We would ask that you make absolute certain that that is something you want to do before suggesting that to the individual or taking any concrete steps before that, because we hate to have to walk back and offer a representation. And I think it is oftentimes in the moment easy to say, yes, 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 I will take your case and I'll represent you. And then one checks with a pro bono coordinator or with their law firm and determines that it's not actually feasible. So if you think that you may want to take on full representation in a case, do talk to the NIJC attorney on site and we can explore that option with you. And then finally, we've just offered there some language for people who may sit through our orientation and hear our overview of legal relief and not see themselves in any of those. And of course, we haven't talked about every possible form of immigration relief. It may be that someone comes through our orientation and has a very close family member who's a lawful permanent resident or a United States citizen, or somebody who's actually been to the United States before, filed other applications. So there may be other forms of relief that emerge, but there may also be people for whom there is no legal recourse in this moment. And for them, we want to provide the guidance that our laws are fluid, they change, new forms of relief emerge, new things happen in people's lives and things change and they become eligible for forms of relief where maybe they weren't before. And so staying in their immigration process, requesting time to explore legal relief is often in their best interest in order to leave open the possibility that there may be opportunity in the future for them to seek legal relief, even if there isn't in this moment. So with that, Ellen, if you can pop back on, you can talk to people about how they can sign up to join us in this work, and then we will look for questions from all of you.
Awesome. So this is so much information, we realize that, but again, you have the PowerPoints, the links were sent in the initial email. And so now what can you do? When can you do it? How are you going to get there? So what we're looking for, as I mentioned before, we're looking for 2 volunteers for 2 shifts a day. We're splitting this for morning shifts and afternoon shifts. If you want to take the whole day and you want to sign up for both of them, that's fine too. The thing is that, like Lisa said, we don't always know when buses are coming. We're anticipating them, but we don't always know. So we will email the evening before your shift to confirm that recent arrivals will be present. Again, we realize this is not always convenient and not conducive to planning other things in life, but we appreciate your patience and recognizing this is the response we need for this situation right now, and this is how Chicago's responding. So in order to sign up for your shifts, again, this is an evolving situation, so excuse our low tech, get her done way to do it. But right there, you have a QR code. That QR code is going to take you to a Google Sheet, okay? A Google Sheet, and really it's just the next week and the week after that, 2 slots for the morning and 2 slots for the afternoon. For right now, this is our system. And what I'm going to ask you to do is put in the first letter of your first name and your last name. And then I'll cross compare that with the registration list and we'll be emailing you. So for example, the slot that I will be filling, I'll put an E. Miller. If you see somebody else there, go to the next one when you're available. And we will open up more slots as this develops and things go on. So I'll send this, the link in the QR code soon, and we will also send the actual address when we confirm your participation. If for whatever reason you've signed up for something and then your availability changes, or you anticipate with high probability that it will change, please let us know because we need to fill these spots. Okay, so email me. I'm quite attentive to my emails, and just let me know that your availability has changed. Thanks for communicating. Next slide. And then for logistics, because how are you showing up, right? What is this space? So it's kind of getting into fall in Chicago. It could be really hot, it could be really cold, and this space, air conditioning is not guaranteed. So we're going to say dress business casual to casual. Jeans are fine, but please also know that air might not be there depending on where you're going to be. So be flexible, wear some layers. Space is limited. It can be hot there. Bring some water, bring whatever food or beverage you want. I'm hearing now that there are some things provided for volunteers and for newly arrived individuals. However, let's just not guarantee that. And if there is something, we want our new neighbors to receive what they need first. Bring a notepad and a pen just in case it helps to have something to jot down, or if you need to give some more information to an individual. And we'll also note that social distancing has been difficult. Masks are optional. The majority of individuals we believe are vaccinated. But this is a thank you for participating at your own risk. And we hope to see you. Last but not least, las ganas de ser parte de un gran equipo. Okay, ya estamos acá, and we are so happy to have you. So on this next slide, we are ready for questions. So I don't see any questions in the chat or the Q&A. Any questions that would be helpful to know? One thing I think that Lisa said, but just to reiterate, when you arrive, there is parking there. When you arrive, public transportation is kind of difficult because it's on the far north side. You'll go in and NIJC staff will be there and we'll be putting in information there and we'll be able to orient you. Okay, so just look for the NIJC table.
And we have not given you the address of the reception center yet. We will be glad to do so once you are signed up and confirmed as a volunteer. For now, it is not super public in order to prevent too much circulation and possible unwelcome visitors to the reception center.
Hey, Lisa, while we're waiting for any last minute questions, I see, so there's some people that have raised their hand and I'm going to enable them to talk. You'll just have to unmute yourself. But while we're doing that too, Lisa, if you can advance to the next slide, there is an evaluation if people with a QR code. If people could just quickly give us your opinion on how this went, or maybe there's not.
No, there is.
Okay, yeah. If you could just give us your opinion on how this went, what else needs to happen? Obviously, we're building this as we go. So Yurisa and Timothy, I have enabled you to talk if you want to come off mute.
Hi, thank you for your time and for this presentation. And I have two questions. One of them is, can we be encouraging people to find jobs? They've been asking us about that. So legally, we wanted to know if that's how to answer that question about working.
Yeah, let's start with that one, and then let's move to your second question. The slide that I shared about, yeah, technically, if you don't have legal authorization to work, we can't say go forth and be employed and not have any problems. We understand people will make decisions for their lives about what they need to do, and so we want to equip them. If you decide to look for employment, you should be very careful about not making a false claim to citizenship. You should be very careful about not using false documents. You should be aware that you're not legally authorized to work and that it could in some ways prejudice an immigration case down the line. But there is also a balance that people need to make, and they need to make their own decisions. So as a lawyer, I can't say, yes, you should go work, because technically speaking, if you're not authorized to work, it is not legal to work. That said, it's a complicated question that people need to make informed decisions about for themselves. I know that's such a lawyerly answer and it's not super responsive, but I think that's the best way that we can offer that advice.
Okay.
Do you have a second question?
Yes. I guess you kind of answered it. Given their temporary status, what are the consequences of them working? Like, just want to make sure I got everything down correctly.
Yeah, I mean, the immigration legal consequences of working might vary depending on what form of immigration status they ultimately decide to seek. I can tell you that many immigration NIJC clients have worked without authorization and have gone on to succeed in their immigration cases without that work having prejudiced their claims. Now, there are some really technical areas. Someone who's applying for asylum, for example, is not considered to be accruing unlawful presence while their asylum application is pending unless they work without authorization. And so again, it doesn't mean that's going to prejudice the asylum claim. It just means that if there is another immigration benefit they seek that requires them to not have unlawful presence, that could be a problem for them if they decide to work now.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Yuriza. We also had a question about if you can make 3 or 3.5 of the 4 hours, how does that work? Really, because sometimes the buses and the flow of individuals is different, and it varies. We did build in a transition hour there. So if there's any questions about a particular shift that you see hasn't been filled and you are available for the majority of that shift, please do reach out. Again, we appreciate your support on this. Any other last minute questions? We realize that we've come to our hour. Any other last minute questions or piece of information, Lisa?
No, just thank you all very much for your interest in joining in this effort. And again, we do this in collaboration with our incredible community partners, and so are very grateful to be a part of the legal community in Chicago that's hopefully responding appropriately and with enthusiastic welcome to the people that are joining our community.
So next steps, I will be emailing participants or volunteers, and we'll be in touch about additional dates in the future as well. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.